Hey guys, welcome back. I hope you're having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled people story. When I bought my house in the suburbs, I thought I was settling into a nice, quiet neighborhood. Sure, there was a homeowners association, but they mostly just took care of stuff like the entrance fountain and coordinated neighborhood parties. No big deal, right? Oh, how wrong I was. It started off slowly at first. I'd get the occasional letter about my grass being half an inch too tall, or that my mailbox needed a fresh coat of paint. Annoying, but nothing major. Then they started hitting me with fines for the most ridiculous violations, like having my trash can visible from the street on non-pickup days. I tried to reason with them, explaining that I have a small driveway and nowhere else to put the can out of sight. But they didn't care. That's when I realized this homeowners association had gotten way too big for its britches. They seemed to think they could control every tiny detail in the neighborhood, and they had their sights set on me since I wasn't just blindly following their every command.
Things escalated when I came home one day to find a bright orange violation notice taped to my front door. It claimed that my grass was dead and unsightly, so I had 2 weeks to resod my entire lawn or face a $1,000 fine. Now my grass wasn't perfect, but it definitely wasn't dead either. I sent them photos proving my lawn wasn't anywhere close to violating any rules. Their response? They rejected my appeal and maintained I still needed to resod or pay up. They clearly weren't interested in facts. This was about flexing their homeowners association muscle. When I didn't resod, the fine appeared on my next homeowners association bill. I contested it again, but they ignored me. Then I started getting notices claiming my mailbox, front door, siding, and just about everything else needed replacing. Each one came with an absurdly short deadline and exorbitant fine if I didn't comply. It was clear they were targeting me now, nitpicking everything they could to bury me in fines. I finally had enough and told them I wasn't paying a cent of their ridiculous fines. I guess that was the wrong move. A few weeks later, I opened my mailbox to find a letter from the Homeowners Association's lawyers. They were taking me to court for non-payment and threatening to put a lien on my house. Unbelievable. I met with my own lawyer who confirmed I had a good case since the fines were bogus and harassment. But a lengthy court battle would cost me either way. That's when I decided if this Homeowners Association wanted a war, I was going to give them one. But I wasn't just going to fight their fines in court. I was going to take down their whole crooked operation for good. I researched homeowners association laws and found they couldn't actually force me to alter my property without a court order. So I stopped doing anything they demanded. No more paint touch-ups, no gutter cleanings, nothing. If they wanted to take me to court, I welcomed it. I also started an online petition to reform the homeowners association bylaws. I canvassed neighbors to share their homeowners association horror stories and scandals. Many had been dealing with similar harassment. My petition gained steam as more people were fed up with the Homeowners Association's self-serving rules. I submitted my petition to the Homeowners Association Board, demanding they reform their archaic bylaws and curb their harassment tactics. They refused, dismissing me as a lone, disgruntled homeowner. Little did they know I wasn't alone. I rallied our neighborhood at the next Homeowners Association election meeting. We showed up in force, voting out the power-hungry incumbents and voting in reasonable candidates committed to homeowners association reform. The very next week, the new board dismissed all fines against me. They sent apologies for the previous board's misconduct. Additional bylaw reforms gave homeowners rights to contest fines and violations fairly. As for the lawsuit against me, we countersued for harassment, serving notices to depose all former board members. Not wanting their misconduct exposed, the Homeowners Association quickly offered to settle by paying all my legal fees. I agreed on the condition they adopt a zero-tolerance policy for harassment moving forward. Through perseverance and organizing my neighbors against injustice, I defeated the Homeowners Association's campaign of harassment against me. Their dreams of unchecked power over the neighborhood were destroyed for good. My story serves as a warning to other homeowners. Don't take abuse from homeowners associations lying down. Know your rights and fight back against coercion disguised as rules. With persistence and allies among your neighbors, you can overthrow the tyranny of a power-hungry homeowners association. My saga proves that the little guy can take on injustice and win. You just have to stand up for yourself and what's right.
The next one is a pro-revenge story. Minor details might not be entirely accurate as I've no interest in a revival of this conflict on any level. I won completely, and any resurrection can only taint the experience. We'll start off by noting that I spent about 2 decades working in security. During that time, I worked in many different types of security in various locations. The one that matters for this story was the time spent in the rental housing tribunal in a major city as a kind of bailiff. For those not knowing what that is, think of a courtroom. In a major city anyway, in a smaller town, it'll probably be an event room in a hotel or community center, as you'd see on TV but with less formality and an adjudicator instead of a judge. They functionally are the same thing for landlords and tenants, but they definitely aren't the same thing. This place exclusively deals with landlord and tenant disputes, and it is the only place to resolve landlord and tenant disputes. Note that I wasn't a bailiff, and it wasn't a court, but these terms mostly accurately describe the situation and my place in it. For 2 years, I worked at the rental housing tribunal. It was early in my time in security when I was 18-20-ish. Being as it was a major city, the sheer number of cases I sat through was beyond my ability to count. I saw everything there was to see. No one is capable of surprising me with a story because I've seen them all. In detail, as a side duty of mine was to ensure all parties had copies of all evidence being presented. I did a lot of photocopying and always inspected everything I copied to ensure nothing got cut off or made illegible. By the time I stopped working there, I probably knew the way everything worked well enough to be an adjudicator myself. Well, no, obviously not, but I'm certainly in no need of a lawyer either should I ever have the need to go there. I also had intimate knowledge of how the system worked beyond the actual rules. Like, for example, adjudicators would always give a little leeway to anyone representing themselves over someone who had a lawyer, or how pissed off adjudicators would get when a party was speaking out of turn. Seriously, do not do that. Skip forward almost a decade. I left the city and am in a fairly large town in the same province, same tenant laws. I have a few roommates in a decently sized townhouse. We get along well, but there's a problem. Only I can write checks and our paydays don't line up. So I'm the one who pays the rent, and I usually can't do it on the first because roommates don't usually all pay on time. We advise the landlord we might be a day or two late, but we'll always have it by the third at the latest. They have no problem with it at all. I spoke to them myself. For about a year, this works fine. No complaints from the landlord because even if we're often a day or two late, we always pay. We're also fairly quiet and don't damage the property. Nearly model tenants. I do not actually have any idea why, but one day this changed. I suspect a different person in the company started overseeing the region. One day, suddenly we got a summons to the rental housing tribunal, hereafter to be referred to as RHT, on the 2nd of the month for failure to pay rent. This doesn't actually lead to a case because we paid the same day. But now we have to pay the application fee the landlord paid to serve the summons. I idioted to the neighbor who was also the superintendent and eventually heard back that their contact at the company was now demanding first of the month, no exceptions. Well, that really didn't work for us, so we probably had to pay that fee 15-20 times over the next 2 years. I could have gone to tribunal over it, but we were technically without a leg to stand on, and I knew it. Maybe if I went enough times, I can ding them for harassment, but I don't have time for that, and my roommates don't care. After being split between us all, the fee wasn't enough deterrent to change our behavior, so we accepted it. If this was the only issue, there wouldn't be much of a story, though. At around the same time, the rent leeway vanished, so did mandatory maintenance. I'm not going to list everything that went wrong and wasn't fixed. You'll get a decent idea at the end. We suffered through it. We were all working too many hours at crap pay to be able to actually do anything about it. We adapted. But after about 2 years, it broke. Everyone but me up and moved out for various reasons within a 4-month period. I'm not going into any details on my roommates at all because things kinda exploded for a couple of different reasons outside of this. No reason to dig any of that up. I had been saving up for a while and was able to quit my job without having to immediately get another, so I suddenly had a lot of time. I didn't want to stay and pay the rent by myself or have to find new roommates I could live with. And with my experience in the RHT, I knew I had the landlord by the balls. So I went for them. I stopped paying rent. Annoyingly, I didn't get a summons the first month, but I did the second. So I went. With a meticulously documented plethora of evidence of failure to maintain the property and entering the property without formal notice. I had a copy for the landlord and a copy for the adjudicator. I know from experience that technically you're supposed to give the other party the evidence before the tribunal, but I also knew about that leeway an adjudicator gives to those who represent themselves, so I didn't give the landlord the evidence until our case came up, 100% total ambush. They argued they were ambushed, but the adjudicator just dismissed the case, dressed me down a little, and told me to file my own summons as I should have done. This was the petty revenge. The landlord and lawyer drove 3 hours to get there for nothing. Worse than nothing. I filed my own summons and the big day shows up. It's been about 4 months of me not paying rent at this point. I'm prepared to if I lose, but I don't think I'm going to lose. The whole thing could not have gone better. I had 20, 30 pages of evidence and 20 odd photographs. They had nothing. They had no actual defense for our water heater being out for 6 months or us not having a fridge for a year, just to mention 2 severe issues. Their entire defense rested on us being late for rent, which actually worked against them once that led to the adjudicator learning how many times we'd paid the application fee and lies that had no evidence to support them. They even talked over me a few times, and I saw in his eyes the one time I opened my mouth to protest during their turn to speak, but forced myself to shut up with every gram of willpower I had, so only a squeak came out. The adjudicator respected me. He had no respect for the landlord. I had won on every possible front. The only question was how much. It was more than I'd ever seen. I got 9 months of free rent, and the landlord was ordered to have everything fixed before the next month was over, or I'd get more. I gave notice I was leaving at the end of the 8th month and left at the end of the 9th. Because the landlord had never renewed the lease, I didn't have to give him the 3-month notice the lease specified. If you want a figure to put to it, I basically got a $13,000 judgment in my favor, adjusted for inflation and rounded. I also made the landlord and lawyer drive 3 hours, twice, only to lose. The landlord's face was so red at the end, I thought he'd have a heart attack. He didn't, though. Bye, Mark! The next one is a petty revenge story. We live in an expensive state, and rents are sky high in our modest development, but we own our little home, which shares a fence with Jake's rented home. The first indication that Jake was not as nice as he appeared was the way he kept his backyard. He had an agreement with his landlord that he would mow the lawn, but instead allowed blackberry brambles to take over the area immediately next to our fence while keeping the rest of his yard under control. When I asked him about this, he claimed it was too expensive for him to hire workers to clear that area. Eventually, we did see workers removing the blackberries as Jake complained about the extra expense. Other times, I would overhear him talking to his next-door neighbor about us. Jake is very religious, and we are not. He is born and raised in the U.S., and my husband is not. We could also tell he disapproved of what he erroneously called our lifestyle. He kept this under wraps the first couple of years while he was still getting to know us. One day he let it slip that the fear that kept him awake at night was that his landlord would raise his rent since he was on a fixed income. This made me feel bad for the guy. Then a storm blew down all 3 sides of our old wood fence. The other neighbors agreed to pay part of the cost after seeing the estimates we produced. After we handed him a letter notifying him of our intention to replace the fence, Jake told us he would talk to his landlord about it. We were months away from a replacement, but in this part of the U.S. it rains several months of the year, and you only have a small window of time to dig post holes before it starts raining again. The workers who do this are booked well in advance for this reason. So, as the deadline approached, we kept checking back with Jake, first reminding him, then pleading for him to do so, and during the last month persistently requesting his landlord's name and address so we could contact him directly. None of this worked. Jake kept delaying, and 2 weeks before the start of the work, he showed up during our family dinner to inspect the fence damage so he could report it to his landlord. I stupidly obliged and gave him a tour. On the day the workers arrived, I texted him we were assuming his landlord didn't mind the replacement because we had not heard a word from him. Then we got Jake's text explaining that he and his landlord found the fence aesthetically displeasing. We were also informed that the landlord would not be paying his half of the cost because he had not been notified in advance. By then, the fence had been completed. I was livid, but summoning the little restraint I had left, I knocked on Jake's door to ask how this had happened and why he had not given our estimates and letter to his landlord. and he lied to my face, saying we had never given him a letter or previous notification. As I was turning to leave after I told him how wrong this was, Jake dared to explain he couldn't let his landlord incur any additional expenses, lest he decide to raise his rent. Over the next few sleepless nights, I plotted our revenge. First, I located the landlord's name and address on the internet. Second, I drafted a letter describing everything that had transpired in small claims court style, with screenshots of his texts going back 6 months, including the ones where Jake claimed that keeping the yard free of blackberries had drained his finances. The letter gave the landlord 3 options. If he hated the fence that much, he would not have to do anything, because we were going to remove it by the end of the month. If he wanted to build a more beautiful fence after that, we would not oppose it, but we'd take out the $2,000 we had already spent from our half of the cost. If he could live with our ugly fence, he could give us 1/3 of the cost, and we'd consider the matter resolved. I also asked the landlord to confirm he had named Jake his representative. We received a phone call no less than 2 days later from a very nice gentleman who wanted to send us a check for 1/3 of the cost. He apologized, saying Jake had never told him about the fence until the day it was being built. Jake's landlord was also very disappointed to read the texts where Jake was taking credit for yard work that the landlord had been paying for. We stopped speaking to Jake for a long time after that, but recently heard from another neighbor that his rent had indeed been raised. The next one is a malicious compliance story. So, I'm a professional chef, and I have been for a few years. In Australia, apprentice chefs are trained in a sort of college where we learn about 150 recipes. Now, many of the recipes are provided to the students in bulky, finicky booklets that you wouldn't really want to take anywhere with you. So I started writing some of the recipes in a separate notebook along with some other recipes I'd learned from coworkers or family members and created a sort of pseudo-cookbook. I would often bring this book into the kitchen so I could remember ingredient quantities and cooking times, and eventually, I would leave the book in the kitchen pretty much around the clock. What I soon found out was that some of the other chefs in the kitchen were using my cookbook to check official recipes for the restaurant we worked for, as typically the head chef would have to tell them, and this got annoying for everyone. This restaurant was a part of a popular sports club in the local area, so consistency was extremely important to management. Having a written record of the new recipes or changes to longtime recipes was very important. As it turned out, management had stopped making changes to the official club recipe book a few months before I even started, so my book became the de facto official recipe book. For a while, this was no issue to me, and I kept adding new recipes to it throughout the next few years. However, after my 3rd year working there, I finished my studies and became fully qualified as a chef. So I suddenly became more expensive to keep on as a staff member, and as such, management started looking for any reason to replace me with a new apprentice. Eventually, they found someone to replace me and gave a half-assed reason for firing me, telling me to take all my things and leave as I could no longer offer what they were looking for. So I took everything I owned and left, including the notebook with all the club's recipes. For a few days, not a whole lot happened, but slowly the club's reviews started complaining about bland food, dry cakes, inconsistent classic recipes, and every other food-related thing you could think of. At one point, there were 50 negative reviews in a single day, which for our town was a massive amount of negative reviews in one day. It felt pretty damn good since I felt they deserved it and left me unemployed on short notice. However, I was quickly offered a new job by a smaller restaurant whose owner knew me from the sports club kitchen. The malicious compliance. After about a week, I received multiple calls, and after answering one, I heard one of the higher managers at the sports club asking if I could return the book as the kitchen needed it back. I obviously laughed and said firmly that it was my book full of my recipes, so it wasn't going anywhere near them, reminding them that they had told me I could no longer offer what they were looking for. The manager clearly began to panic as he offered to give me my job back and just let bygones be bygones. I already had a new job, so I completely brushed off this offer and ignored him. I hung up pretty soon after that. I started putting the recipes from my book on the new restaurant's menu, and it was beginning to attract a few regular customers from the sports club. So I quickly found myself with more and more responsibility and command within the kitchen, to the point that about 1/3 of the menu was from my book. Now, this slow trickle of sports club regulars picked up speed after about 3 months, and led to several high-level managers from the club deciding to visit the restaurant I'd helped build and virtually demanding I give them my cookbook, claiming it would be much more beneficial for the community if they had it. My head chef laughed in their faces and told them to piss off. It's been about 2 years, and my head chef and I have a very positive relationship, and the customer base we have at the restaurant is better than ever. We didn't take every customer from the big club, but it was enough damage to their profits to scare a few investors away and also led to a decent bit of damage to one of the higher managers' reputations. Furthermore, the recipe issues and negative reviews led to the majority of the kitchen quitting, and according to one of my old colleagues, they cited the lack of support and organization from upper management as the final reasons everyone was quitting. This led to an even larger dip in the quality of the restaurant food. I also get paid significantly more at this restaurant than I was at the sports club. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We'll see you again.